particular fish. But here at the hatchery, we're one of the few places in the country that actually have brood stock for striped bass. We have big old females outside in the raceways. They're 20 plus pounds each. They're at least 7 years old. Some of them are up to 10 years old, and they are brood stock. That's the only brood stock we keep here on station. And we actually provide eggs to some other states around the nation because of our captive brood stock here. They're cool fish to see, but they're not easy to see. They swim very quickly in the raceways. We'll probably take some food out and see if we can get them to come up. When they hit that food, they hit it hard. And the reason why wipers were even created, this hybrid vigor kind of idea, white bass are little, but they're fun to catch. They fight. They got a lot of fighting. Striped bass get big, but they're not all that hard to catch, and they don't really fight you very much. But guess what? A wiper's supposed to be the best of both worlds. And so you get the fight of a white bass, and you get the size of a striped bass. So that's why the popularity of the wiper. And there's actually two kinds of wipers. There's two names. You'll hear the name sunshine bass and palmetto bass. Those are actually the correct names for the hybrid fish. And you get one of them, you get the palmetto bass by taking striped bass eggs and white bass sperm. But if you take white bass eggs and striped bass sperm, you get the sunshine bass. So this is just how you hybridize them. So, but anyway, if you catch a wiper, you've caught a fish that was produced in a hatchery. They don't get together in nature. Finally, sunfishes. This is probably the best known group of fish in Kansas, but they're also fish that suffer from misnomers. Sometimes people call these fish perch. They're not. The sunfish family is really easily divided up into three groups. You've got the basses, which we call the black bass, the largemouth, smallmouth, and spotted bass. You've got crappies, and we say crappies here in Kansas. Some people say crappies, but I don't know. I'd say crappies if I were you. Black and white, and then panfish. That's the bluegill, the red ear, the green sunfish, orange spotted sunfish. There's a number of different kinds of sunfish, and those are we call them panfish. These guys are all active in the daytime. They're sight feeders, so they do best in clear water. So those are just a couple of, and that's why when you're fishing for bass, you can use lots of fancy lures that spin and make noise and vibrate and stuff. But they're sight feeders, so they're going to go for that. Lastly, finally, the perches are the fish. There's a true class of perch. The walleye is one of them, the sauger, the saugeye, yellow perch, and then the darters, my coaster that fell on the ground. The darters are the tiny members of this group. They're very colorful. They're as colorful as a lot of tropical fish. They make great aquarium fish. If you want to keep darters, they're not difficult to keep, but you can't keep them in a mixed tank. You have to always remember when you make a community tank of native fish, there's one rule that applies. Big fish eat little fish. So you're going to have little fish like darters. You can't have anything else in there that is going to get big by eating. We've done this a number of times, or one or two times. We put little tiny green sunfish in there. They're only about this big. They're the same size as the darters. They go, all of a sudden, our green sunfish is twice the size, and our darters are pretty much gone. And so yeah, you have to balance your tanks if you want to keep these guys. But they are found, and the darters are found in streams, clear streams, and the fastest parts of the streams, and the riffles and the runs. That's where you're going to find them. They got those fins that are down like this. They keep them down to the bottom, and the walleye pictured there is what we're going to see over there. What makes a perch a perch? A couple of different characteristics, but one of those things is this fact that they have two dorsal fins that are completely separated there, and the first set of fins has the spines in it, the spiky ones, and these have soft rays. That's one of the characteristics that makes you a perch. There are some other things too. But again, pikes, or walleye pike, this is sometimes called a walleye pike, and pikes don't have that short dorsal fin without spines, or they don't have the spiny dorsal fin. And if you're a sunfish, those two fins are actually joined together into one, so those are some of the things. And lastly, the drums. We do have, this is mostly a marine family. Again, if you go fishing in the ocean, you have red drums and black drums and all kinds of drums. They get big. But we do have a freshwater drum. That's what it's called, a freshwater drum. And they get their name because they make a booming sound. They use the air bladder that we talked about earlier, and then they have that stone in their ear. It's called a large otolith. It's pictured up there in the top right-hand corner. They're sometimes called lucky stones, so people who catch drums sometimes dig into the skull to get those otoliths out. They can be used to age the fish. They also grow in rings. But some people make jewelry out of them, so there are all kinds of things you can do with them if you want. But the drum do get to be a pretty good sized fish. Finally, that does it for what we're going to do, and then we're just a quick question or quiz, I guess. Who remembers which fish in Kansas has poisonous parts?
The gar.
The gar, yeah. And which fish is probably the most widespread in Kansas? And there's actually several answers to this, but anytime you ask for the most numerous fish, that's a hard one. But they're, gizzard shad is one of them. Also, a red shiner is another one that is ubiquitous in Kansas, but we didn't really talk about that one. Anybody know what a mad tom is? Catfish. And then what is a wiper?
Bass.
Hybrid fish, right? Between the striped bass and the white bass. So you pass. That's my quiz. So what we will do is take you over to the hatchery, and I will say we are in the tail end of the walleye hatching. Walleye, most fish spawn based on temperatures, water temperatures. Walleye are one of the first fish to spawn in Kansas waters. The temperature gets to be about 58 degrees. That's when walleye start spawning. So that's very early in the season. We start netting for walleye. We don't have any walleye broodstock here. We net all of our fish in the reservoirs. We take the eggs from them right there, and even the sperm from the males. Sometimes we keep males here in the hatchery for a couple of weeks so that we can fertilize eggs if they aren't fertilized out in the field. And then we put them in specialized jars that we'll be able to see over there. And we stock walleye when they're 4 days old. I don't want to steal from the tour, but they're not here for very long because we stock walleye as fry. And then they're 4 days old when their mouth parts develop. For the first 3 days of their life, they're living on the yolk sac. So we don't feed them. They don't need anything to keep them more than 4 days. Guess what? You have a lot more bigger fish, but half as many in your tank because they start eating each other. So a rule of thumb, if you're big enough to eat the other guy, you're going to do it. There's no sympathy in fish. But that's why we stock them at 4 days. But we do keep some walleye and raise them in ponds out back. We won't be able to go to the ponds, but we turn them into fingerlings. When you talk about fish culture, you're talking about fry, which are very tiny day-old fish or just newly hatched fish. Fingerlings are fish about the size of your finger, and then you have shorts and intermediates, and then so 5 to 6 inches or 8 to 10 inches and things like that. But we do keep some walleye. We don't raise them in the raceways because when they're that tiny, they're feeding on microscopic organisms, and we can't make a bloom. We need to create a pea soup sort of situation. You can't really do that in a raceway. It's a concrete tank. Doesn't have a nutrient bottom on it. So we use ponds for that. And so we actually have 6 ponds that are in the back, kind of the back 40 here at the hatchery, where we'll raise the walleye to fingerling size. Just a certain percentage of them. It's a trade-off between raising. We can hatch a lot of eggs for very few pennies, really, realistically. Every time you try to raise a fish to any certain size, your cost increases astronomically, basically, because you've got food involved, you've got labor involved. So every inch you add to the fish is a dollar figure. There's a dollar amount to it. So by stocking fry, we have met our objectives, because when walleye are out in the wild, they certainly lay their eggs out in the wild. It's not a problem. They'll hatch in the wild. But what you have in the wild situation is you get water fluctuations and temperature fluctuations. Some of those eggs get stranded. Some of them die. And so in a hatchery environment, whereas out in the lake, maybe 10% of those eggs hatch. in the hatchery environment, we can get 50 to 60% of those eggs to hatch. So we've increased the number of fry to start with. Now, same number of fry are going to get eaten as food for other fish, but you're going for that 1%. So if we start with a couple of million, 1% of a couple of million is a lot more than 1% of 15,000, for example. So we've just increased the number out there. So a little bit about the logic of why. And walleye is, of course, a very popular fish here in Kansas, but it's a specialized fish. Not everybody goes and fishes for walleye. It's not typically a fish you fish from the bank for. Most people who are walleye fishermen are pretty specialized. They have a pretty big rig. They have a boat usually. They've got a depth finder and they're pretty hardcore. And they're very efficient too. As technology advances, guess what? It's easier to catch the fish, and so it's harder to keep up with keeping fish available because you can outfish them. You can find the big ones, and you can get them. So anyway, I think Travis is waiting on us.